Hello everyone, my name is Luis Aguilar, and in this video, we're going to cover functions, but more in depth. I would like to give a quick disclaimer saying that if you have not already, please watch the basics functions before continuing on this video, because this video is just going to be a continuation of the previous one. Alright, thank you, and let's get started. So prototypes, right? Let's talk about them. So what are they? Well, they help by making the code look cleaner by no longer restricting you to place the definition before the call. Prototypes can also be called function declarations. I guess it just depends how you learned it, but they both mean the same, right? An important thing to note is that it's important to place the function definition or the function prototype before the function calls. So how do they look like in action, right? Here in this first block, we see a normal function setup like we talked about in the previous video, but with prototypes, we get to see a little bit of a differentiation, right? So let's break it down into three parts. First, like we went over before, we have the function prototype up here. And then we have our function call. And then last, we have our function definition. As you can see, it may not look much of a difference, but when you are dealing with many functions in a single program, it is good to keep it clean by displaying the functions you are working with at the top and then having the code at the bottom so that like when or if people see your code, it could be helpful for what to look for. So what about data within the functions, right? Well, there may be many times where you would need to send data to a function. This gets familiar with some terms though. First, we have arguments. Now, arguments are values that are passed into a function, right? And then we have parameters. And these are variables that hold the values that are being passed into the function. Keep in mind these two terms because they will be very important in getting to learn more about functions. And this is how it looks like in practice, right? So here we have a basic setup of a function using prototypes similar to what was shown earlier. But you may notice a few changes, so let's talk about them. The first change we see is the function prototype. We see that we have a parameter in here, integer. For the prototype, it is not required to have a name for the parameter. The data type in this case is the only thing required. It's an optional step to name it, so you're free to do so if you'd like. Then, the next change is in our function call. We see that the function is called with argument 10. This is passed into our integer parameter, which then leads to our next change, the function definition. As you can see, it's now similar to our prototype setup, but now we have the parameter and it is named. Naming the parameter in the definition is required. The argument 10 is going to be passed to the parameter variable number, and then we will follow the function code and just print out the number. One last thing to mention before we move on to our demo, that in concept, pass by value is how they function, right? When an argument is passed, only a copy is passed. Any changes do not affect the original argument. So now that we have talked about more about the concepts of functions in regard to this video, let's see how they work in our demo. In this demo, we have a basic function set up here using prototypes. So if you see here on line 4, we have our prototype. And then if we keep going down program, we have our function call on line 9 with argument 10 being passed, right? For right now, let's just ignore these commented out lines here. We'll be using them very shortly. So let's just ignore them just for right now. And then if we keep going down the program on line 16, we see we have our function definition. We see that we have our data type along with the name of our parameter number. We then have some basic output just for the purpose of this demo. So let's run the program and see what pops up, right? So let's run it. Proton 1, right? So see, we can start here when the program is executed. At first, we have our prompt basically saying that we'll be sending integer 10 to our function test function. And then we move on to line 9, which is our function call. So we're starting to call our function. And then when we call our function, we send argument 10 over, right? So argument 10 will then be passed to our function definition. And our parameter number will receive that. So now number should contain 10. So here we see we are now in test function. We're good so far. And then our number passed is 10. So great. We passed the argument successfully and our function got the argument in its parameter successfully. Then it says now we are now leaving the text function. So just to see where we are in the program, and then we leave it, and then now we are back here at we are now back in main function, and then we just exit the program, right? So now let's uncomment these two lines and see what will happen. Remember, any changes you make, please make sure to save the program and then recompile. So let's do that. Compile. See, no issues, and then let's run it, and then we have our basic prompt here. So this is what we'll be focusing on right here. So we have our basic output, and then we're good. And then when we execute line 9, we see we have the same as what we executed before, which is 10. But then when we return back into main, we see that we now have to execute line 10, which is, if you see, is another function call. So we're just calling our function again, but this time we're sending over argument 456. And then it has the same output as if it was before with 10. And then just for a good measure, we do it again after the second function call is executed. We come back into main, and then our third function call to test function on line 11 will send over argument 96. And as you can see, they're just quite identical. We're just sending in different arguments. So this was a basic demo to show you guys how prototypes work or can work in a program. In this next demo, we're going to showcase how functions with multiple parameters work, right? So like our previous demo on line 4, we see that we have our function prototype, but we see that instead of 1, we have 3 parameters. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that naming the parameters is not required only for the prototype, right? And then if we move on to main, we see we have set up 3 variables called num1 through num3. And then we have simple prompts to get any integer to add together. We then have our function call on line 22. And we see that we have our variables num1, num2, num3 as our arguments to pass to our function, which is our next section to go over. We are then here at our function definition. And then we see that we have our parameters with them being named, which is required for the definition. So just for this sake, we have number 1, number 2, number 3. And then we also have basic prompts to keep track of where we are in the program. And then on line 31, we see that we are adding the argument values that are passed to our parameters. So now let's run the program and see what the output is. So this would be proto2, right? So now it's prompting us for our first value. This could be anything, right? Or within the integer encasing, you know. So let's do 15, right? So let's think for our second value. Do 96 and let's do 54, right? Boom. So now when we press enter, we then call our function on line 22, and then since we gave each variable a number, they are then passed as arguments to our add function. So we see here that we are now in add function, so we are now in here. This is called, and then our function call sent over 15, 96, and 54 respectively. And then we are now going to get the sum in here, which is, we're just basically adding them. And as you can see, when we output it together, we get the sum of 165. So now we move on to line 32, basically saying we're now leaving the function's over. And then we come back here, line 22 is now executed and done with, we move on. And then line 24 is then executed, basically saying that you're back in the main function and it's over, right? So this demo's main purpose was to cover functions with multiple arguments being passed to a function. In our last demo of the video, we're going to showcase how the concept of functions is passed by value. So we have a basic setup of functions here, right? In main, and we're going to get this, right? In main, we have some prompts to keep track of where we are in the program. And then on line 15, we have our function call by passing one argument. This is going to showcase passed by value. So we have an integer, num, that is initialized to the value 2021, as we can see here on line 11. We pass the argument to our function. Our variable num is given value 2021. We will then pass that value as an argument to our function, and then it will be sent to our function definition here. So here on the function definition, we display the number, what number is passed, and then we will change it to a different number to demonstrate the change. We will then finish executing the function and return to main, and we will display what the number is when we return. So let's run the program and let's see what the output looks like, right? So we executed it, and let's just go by it little by little. Here it is. So here we are. As you can see over at the top, we'll be showcasing pass by value in functions. We will pass argument 2021 to our function. So as you can see here, we initialize num to 2021, and then just to make sure our variable num is 2021, we have a prompt here. So this seems to be checkout. We're okay, right? And then now we're just prompting that we'll be entering our function. So we will now enter our test function, and then now the value 2021 is then passed as an argument to our test function. And then now we are here. As you can see, we are now in test function. When we are test function, after we have a prompt just to make sure that the value is passed correctly, and we have 2021, which is great. So now we have a prompt stating that we will be changing our variable number to 3000. So as you can see here, we initialize that as number is now 3000. And then we then have an output to see what the number is. And as you can see, yes, the new number is 3000. So now after we finished all that, we have just a prompt saying that we are now leaving the function just to make sure where we are at. And then the function is executed, is done, over, and now we are back in main. So now we are back in the main function, as we can see here. And then if we print out the number, num, up here in our main function, we see that the value still is 2021. And then see, we have no change, and the program is finished. This demo basically showcased in concept that functions work in a pass by value way. So in this video, we went more in depth with functions, and we demonstrated with various programs about how functions can be written and how a function concept worked in practice. I hope this video really helped you guys, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.